In this video, we are going to learn how to use the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. So, we start out with this equation. It says x squared minus 10x equals 11. Recall from the previous video, and if you haven't already watched it, watch at least the first minute or two to see what the quadratic formula does and what it is. But we are going to see now how to use it. So, the quadratic formula solves equations that are of this form. And the formula itself is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So right there in that box is your quadratic formula. And it solves any quadratic equation so long as it's set equal to 0. Remember that visually that is also showing if a parabola crosses the x-axis, you're finding the x values where the parabola crosses the x-axis, so the x-intercepts. Okay, let me get rid of that. So, first things first, we need to set this equation equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 11 from both sides, and that just ends up equaling out to x squared minus 10x minus 11. Now, what I do when I use the quadratic formula is I write out a bank of the values that I have. So I identify my a, b, and c values so that this just becomes a glorified plug and chug. It looks nasty, but if you know your order of operations and if it's decimals that are involved, you have a calculator nearby, this is very, very simple. It just looks gross. So my a value first, my b value, and then my c value. Well, a is 1, right? That's the coefficient of the x squared term. B is negative 10. That minus sign belongs with the b value, and then minus 11. So now what we're going to do is we're very simply going to take these values and plug them into the quadratic formula. What will be our answer or answers will be the answers to this. Now I want to point out, this factors. So I'm not telling you you can't factor to solve this. I'm saying we're going to use the quadratic formula to solve it. Okay, so the opposite of b would be the opposite of negative 10. So I'm going to plug this in step by step. So you get the opposite of b plus or minus, I'm just copying the formula, the square root of b squared, which would be negative 10 squared. We'll go step by step for this first one. Minus 4 times a is 1. C is negative 11. Plugging it in for the c term. All over that whole thing 2 times a, which is 2 times 1. And you know what? I should have an x here to say that x is going to equal this number. Okay, that's it. That's the quadratic formula part. You've used it. In fact, when learning how to use it, I would repeat this step 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. Just do that step. Don't go on to the next step I'm about to show you. Just practice using the formula. Because the rest of the steps are simplifying with the well, not with the quadratic formula, but with the order of operations. Like you know how. So practice getting here again and again and again. You'll be great. Okay, I'm going to finish the problem, but please take that advice. It'll help a lot. Okay, so now we take the opposite of negative 10, which is 10, plus or minus the square root of negative 10 squared is negative 10 times negative 10 is 100. Now this is going to be minus 4 times 1 is 4 times negative 11 is negative 44. Ooh, all over 2 times 1 is 2. So yeah, it takes a little while to simplify, but after a while you'll get quicker at simplifying it and you won't need to do as many steps. I'm showing every step. This will be 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 plus 44 is what that amounts to, is 144, all over 2. Now, if you can take the square root, do it. If you can't, we'll use a calculator, or down the road you'll learn how to simplify those square roots. The square root of 144, well, what number when squared gives you 144? 12. So you get 10 plus or minus 12 over 2. Beautiful. Now what does that plus or minus mean? It means that we have two solutions. It means that x is equal to 10 plus 12 over 2, or, it's literally read or, 10 minus 12 over 2. And if you simplify this out, 10 plus 12 is 22, divided by 2 is 11. 10 minus 12 is negative 2, divided by 2 is negative 1. Those are our answers. If you plug them into the original equation, guess what? Negative 1 squared is 1. Negative 10 times negative 1 is 10, and 1 is 11. And then it'll work with 11 as well. Awesome stuff. All right, I'm going to do another one here. And then on the flip side of the video, it's going to be a long video, I will go over a third example. All right, so just do 3 examples. Here we go. It's already set equal to 0. I am going to use this formula right here, right? So I'm going to set up everything, I guess, facing this way. And then I'm going to flip over when I start simplifying everything. So we've got A, B, and C. Well, in this case, A is equal to 3, B is negative 10, and C is positive 2. So now we're going to plug everything into the quadratic formula. So we've got x equals the opposite of b is going to be the opposite of negative 10. Now I'm going to shorten this a little bit from what I did last time. The opposite of b is 10 plus or minus the square root. Now we're going to square negative 10. All right, so that I'm going to still keep in here. So squaring negative 10 minus, we're going to do 4 times 3 times 2, that's 4ac, all over 2a. After a while, you'll commit it to memory. Again, keep practicing that step right there. Now all we got to do is simplify it. Let's go. So I've got x equals 10 plus or minus, can't do anything with that yet. That's going to be the square root. Negative 10 times itself is 100. I'm going to shorten this here. Minus 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24. That's all over 2 times 2 is 4. All right, well, 10 plus or minus, that's going to be the square root of 76 all over 4. So some of your teachers will accept that as the exact answer in what's called radical form. Down the road, I'll teach you how to get things into simplest radical form where we can actually reduce the 76. For now, we'll leave it there. Or you take your handy-dandy calculator and you calculate this out, especially if they say round to the nearest tenth, let's say. 10 plus root 76 over 4. Or, remember, we got the minus 2, 10 minus root 76 over 4. That's what the plus or minus means. So I'm very simply going to plug that into my calculator. So 10 plus the square root of 7. It's so much fun watching someone use a calculator, I'm sure. And then I'm going to divide that by 4. So this answer I get approximately 4.7 if we round to the nearest tenth. Or, we'll do this now. 10 minus the square root of 76. It's about 1.28, and we'll divide that by 4. That's approximately 0.3. Which means that on a graph, we're crossing approximately just, well before 1, and then just before 5. Right? So just before 1 and then just before 5 are our x-intercepts. I'll see you on the flip side of this video. We'll do one more, and you might be like, one more, really? It's going to be worth it. See you there. And here we are, as promised, on the flip side of the video, one more problem, and it is x squared plus x equals negative 4. As we saw with the quadratic equation, any quadratic equation in general form, using the quadratic formula, we've got to have everything equal to 0. So I've got to add 4 to both sides, and when I do that, I get x squared plus x plus 4 equal to 0, right? If I add 4 to both sides, there's no like terms the 4 combines with on the left, negative 4 and 4 is 0. So now I'm going to write out my bank like I did in the beginning last time, and I've got A equals 1, so a little invisible 1 right there. B equals 1, nice, and C equals 4. So now I'm just going to use my quadratic formula and see what happens. So I'm going to abbreviate this a little bit quicker. So we've got the opposite of B, x equals the opposite of B, which is negative 1, plus or minus b squared. So we're going to square out b. That's 1 times itself, right? So that's going to be 1 eventually. Minus 4 times a is 1. Times c, which is 4. And that's all over 2 times a. Now, let's get simplifying. So now that we have that, it's just simplifying. Again, this is the step I want you to get to in practice too. I've got negative 1 plus or minus the square root. 1 squared is 1 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 4 is 16. Oh boy. All over 2. We're almost done. We get negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 16 is negative 15 over 2. The square root of a negative number. There are no real numbers that when multiplied by themselves give us negative 15. So we write no real solutions. What that means is graphically, we knew this graph, x squared plus x plus 4, was facing up, but I don't exactly know where it's shifted to, somewhere like this, but I know that it's not going to cross the x-axis because there's no real solutions. Very cool stuff. So I wanted to show you that kind of problem there. That's it, folks, for the quadratic formula. In the next video, we are going to go over how to use a part of the quadratic formula to determine how many solutions, 0, 1, or 2, that a quadratic equation will have. Can't wait.